relatively straightforward. Um, yeah, but we'll see how it goes. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this opportunity to come together and study your word. Pray that you would bless our conversation tonight, help us to interpret your word correctly, and to be encouraged by what we read tonight. Thank you for what you're going to do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, we're going to be in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 16. Apologize. I'm getting over a bit of a cold I've had for the last 2 weeks, so I might cough a couple times tonight. But I'll try to keep it to a minimum, not Rona. I've had 4 COVID tests in the last week and a half. Confirmed, not Rona. So, um, before we get into tonight's study, um, let's talk about what's happened the last few weeks. So, the last 3 weeks we've been in, we've kind of 3-part little mini series in Luke on what topic? What were we talking about the last 3 weeks? Sermon, Sermon on the Mountain Plains. Yes, yep, more or less. Um, Sermon on the Plains is called Luke. It's more or less a Sermon on the Mount. Um, from the other Gospels, we talked a little bit about why there's some confusion, why there might be some differences. Do you guys remember why there might be some differences between the Sermon on the Plains and the Sermon on the Mount? So we talked a little bit about how there are speakers would often have kind of a set sermon or teaching that they would do, and they'd tweak it a little bit for each different place that they went to. So there's probably some of that going on there. This is probably a sermon that Jesus gave multiple times in multiple places, and it was probably a little bit different in each place. Yep, exactly. Dodge has got it. What were some of the key points from the sermon on the plains slash mountain plains? So we had the four beatitudes, four blessings, if you will, the four curses, kind of an inversion of position, which means that things that would seem to be true are not necessarily true. The blessed are the poor, blessed are the um, those who weep, etc. That doesn't necessarily make sense to us at first, but then we talked about how some different ways to interpret that. What else? What were some other elements of the Sermon on the Plains? Yep, turn the other cheek. So, um, yeah, don't take revenge. Don't give into insulting behavior. That can be difficult. Talked about hypocrisy, right? Blinding a blind. Taking a log out of your own eye before you take a speck out of your brother's. Um, the we talked about the idea of knowing a tree by its fruit, which basically means that somebody who has a good heart will do good things. Somebody who has a bad heart will do bad things, right? Because what your heart is, it's what you treasure. So that's where your values are. All right, good. All right, so this week, we're gonna go. Uh, we're moving away from Jesus' sermon to some of Jesus' actions. Um, so in chapter 7, which is what we're gonna be in this week, the first part of it, we'll see two of Jesus' miracles. Then later on, we're gonna have an interaction with John the Baptist. And then we're gonna have Jesus do some more teaching based upon interaction he has with a woman at a event that he's at. All right. Can I have a volunteer to read chapter 7, verses 1 through 10? Oh, I got fish sticks to work for me.
I can.
Go for it.
Jesus heals a centurion's servant. After he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is one who built us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and I say to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turned to the crowd that followed him, and said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well.
Thank you. Okay. So after he gets done giving the sermon on the plains, he enters Capernaum. Now there's a centurion who has a sick servant. So what's a centurion?
Basically, a captain of 100 men and so
Yeah. Yep. More or less an officer in the Roman army. Yep. There's actually a lot of controversy historically speaking about where these guys ranked in Roman society. Um, I would I won't get into exactly the controversy and the different theories, but I would say it's pretty safe to say upper middle class in the Roman society. So not upper class, and not quite middle of the middle class, but upper middle class. Now, so he's a Roman. Um, so that already gives us a little bit of pause because what kind of relationship do the Jews in Judea have with the Romans? Hashtag besties. Love having the Romans here. Hashtag blessed. Yeah, yeah, definitely the opposite, right? Yeah, they saw the Romans as an occupying force. The Romans were there to keep the Jews in line and to make sure that they didn't break away and become their own nation. So definitely not the besties. Now there were some groups within Judean society that tried to kind of ally themselves with the Romans, like the Sadducees, but those people were rare. There were other groups like the Zealots that did their best to try and assassinate all the Romans they could find, specifically the Sicarii, one of the sects of the Zealots. And then there were the Pharisees, um, which were Pharisees were kind of like the conservative rural teachers in a lot of ways. Um, and they kind of resented the Romans and looked down on them. They kind of thought of themselves as better than them, but stopped short of going out and trying to assassinate them all the time. But they would definitely like not enter their houses and things like that. So not in general, most people in Judean society that were Jews hated the Romans. Now that's kind of interesting because we have Jewish elders here coming to Jesus, and what are they doing when they come to Jesus?
They're speaking on behalf of a Roman.
Yeah, they're lobbying for the Roman. So the Jewish elders come, and the centurion asks. The centurion hears about Jesus and asks their elders to go talk to Jesus. So the elders go and they plead with Jesus to come to his house, and they make a claim. Yeah, that's that's what Wingate has it right. No, 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 no. He's cool. He's got upvotes all over the place on his profile, right? Like he's got upvotes on Reddit. This is like a Reddit policy by Reddit here. A horrible way to do policy, by the way. But no, it's true that they're like, oh, he's cool, right? He goes, he is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue. So it's kind of interesting because there's a little bit of controversy in the commentaries as to who these elders are. Some people think that they're the civic leaders because a religious leader from the synagogue would never tell, um, would never lobby for Jesus to go to um, a centurion's home and heal his servant. But I think it's probably a little bit of a weak case because they're specifically talking here about how he built our synagogue. Like, no, he's cool. He built our synagogue. Now the synagogue was kind of the center of Jewish life. It's way more important for them at the time than a church would be to us. Um, this is kind of like their church local hangout, um, coffee shop, um, if you will, common area. It's way beyond what a church would be for us. So for the Roman centurion to actually pay for them to build a synagogue does show some level of compassion with this guy. Now, there's a lot of question as to is this guy a believer? I think that's a bit of a stretch to say that he is a believer in the Jewish God necessarily. Um, but he certainly shows compassion to them. Um, and you know, beyond just their words here, beyond beyond just their words here, um, it his the fact that they're going to Jesus and lobbying for him, I think shows what a good relationship he had with them. So he asked them to go to Jesus to heal a servant, which is also kind of interesting because it shows a deep care he has for his servant. He doesn't want his servant to die. Um, some commentators are like, well, he didn't want to lose his money, which I mean potentially true, but I, Roman centurions were generally not particularly concerned about the lives of their servants. Okay, it's relatively rare. Um, you can always replace servants. That's why they're servants. This guy actually goes into his out of his way to um, to try and find healing for this guy. So um, he the Jewish leaders come and ask him to come to his house and heal him. And what does Jesus do? Is Jesus like, you know what? Forget that. I'm not healing a freaking Roman centurion servant. Yeah, Jesus goes, okay, and he goes with them. I mean, yeah, that's okay, but yeah, basically on my way, like Winged said, right? Now it's interesting that Luke picks the story out, because what do we say about Luke's focus? Each gospel has kind of its own focus, and what's Luke's? Who's his target audience? Yeah, Luke is writing to the Greeks, the Gentiles, specifically the Greeks, right? So it's interesting that he selects a story here with a really hated Gentile, a Gentile among Gentiles, if you will. A centurion would be respected in Greco-Roman society. The culture that Luke is writing to would respect a centurion, just like if like again, we talked about his upper middle class. Think like this: if you were going to go to a business dinner or a banquet or something, or you're at a party, and they're like, "Hey, that guy over there, he's like a fighter jet captain. He's the leader of a fighter squadron." Would you think to yourself like, "Oh, that's kind of a cool guy"? Like, if you're at a bar, you're like, "I'll buy him a drink," or if you're at a party, you're like, "I'm gonna go make sure I go talk to him. He probably has some really interesting stories and he's a cool guy, right?" The That's kind of what the Greco-Roman audience would look at the centurion as. So, like, oh, he's probably a cool guy, right? But they would also understand that Romans probably not a fan of, or Jewish probably not a fan of him. Just like we would look at the Confederate captain and be like, Afghanis, like the Taliban, probably not a big fan of that guy. Yeah, but we think he's cool, right? Like, so, so that's what makes this kind of an interesting story, is that his audience would realize that Jesus and the Jewish leaders would not be a fan of Centurion, but they would kind of look at him as, oh, he's a neat guy, right? So Jesus goes to heal the Centurion's servant. That shows that Jesus cares about Gentiles. It's important for the story selection. Okay, moving on. The Centurion hears that they're coming. So probably what happened was one of the Jewish leaders runs back and goes, hey, good news, he's coming here to heal him. And the Centurion sends a servant out, okay, who sends another guy out to talk to Jesus. And what does he tell Jesus? Yeah. So he basically says, so we're going to circle back to one phrase he gives here. He says, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you. Okay, so we're gonna go back to that. But as Dodge and Winged said, he says, you could do this from anywhere. You don't have to come here. Um, just say the word and you'll be healed. Okay. Which is interesting because everybody else asked Jesus to come and heal. This guy understands that Jesus has enough authority just to be able to say it and have it be done. And he says in verse 8, here he explains why. For I too am a man set under authority with soldiers under me. So he knows what it's like to be in the chain of command. He's got people over him and people under him. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and my servant, do this, and he does this. So he goes, I understand what it's like to be in a chain of command, to have authority, and to be, to submit to authority. He goes, I know you're a person of authority. Just say the word, my servant will be healed. So Jesus has an interesting reaction to this. He goes, he marvels at it. He turns to the crowd that followed him and said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. So Jesus actually kind of puts the crowd down, including the religious leaders. Yeah, it is an incredible statement contextually. Now, there's a couple interesting things here because Jesus is really impressed by this. And even the part that you guys picked out, I think, is impressive. So that's certainly part of it. The fact that Jesus sees this guy gets that Jesus has so much authority that he doesn't need to come and put on a show in order to heal. He just says a word. Okay. Nobody else at this point in the gospel, not even Peter, seems to understand that Jesus has that kind of authority. And I can make the claim. Some people are getting up in arms about the Peter claim. Um, but I can make that claim because Jesus says, "Not even in Israel have I found such faith." So Jesus specifically rules out the disciples as having this level of faith. Okay, so the most powerful faith that he's found has not been Israel. That's really important contextually speaking, like Winged said. I think that part of the reason why he says that, and so I'm gonna be a little cautious here, but because I didn't encounter this in any of the commentaries, um, but I feel like I am familiar enough with Greco-Roman society to be able to make this claim. I think that this Roman soldier centurion is also looking out for Jesus in a sense. And my claim for that comes from the "Do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, do not I did not presume to come to you." So he explains to Jesus why he didn't come. Okay, I did not come to you because I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. Okay, Jesus is a rabbi. Okay, he's running in Pharisee circles. Now, obviously, he's having lots of problems with the Pharisees, and he's continually aggroing the Pharisees. We get that. But if you were to be in the in Judea at the time, you would kind of classify Jesus as a rogue Pharisee teacher. Okay, he does Pharisee things. He gathers disciples. He goes around to towns and kind of the rural areas around Galilee to preach about God and to teach from the Torah. You go, okay. Obviously, he's not loved in Pharisee circles. He's probably like a rogue Pharisee. Okay. Now, um, based on what we talked about the people groups, how would the Jewish audience that Jesus is talking to react if Jesus was seen talking to, doing favors for, and going to the house of a Roman centurion? It was a long question, so I'll restate it more succinctly. How would the Jewish audience around Galilee respond to Jesus going to the house of a Roman centurion? Again, going to someone's house is shown some level of approval and affirmation in this society. Okay? Yeah, scandal intensifies. He had a big enough problem. It caused a big enough scandal when Jesus took a tax collector on as um, as a disciple, right? Because tax collectors were seen as collaborators with the Romans, so like that was a huge deal. To actually go to a Roman soldier, a Roman centurion of all people's house, would be a big deal. Think of it this way, okay? Think of it as you're in occupied France in the 1940s, right? The Nazis are under control, and your pastor goes down and hangs out at the house of a Gestapo captain. Um, yeah, would you think more of or less of your pastor afterwards, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, your pastor is probably not going to be preaching the sermon on Sunday because he's going to be killed by the resistance, right? And then we talked about the Sicarii. Like they would come, the Sicarii. Jesus would have a major target on his back from the Sicarii. Now, Jesus appears to be fairly unconcerned about that, right? Like Jesus is willing to go to the Roman centurion's house, which is interesting, right? Jesus doesn't care. Jesus is like, I don't care about what these people think of me. I'm just going to do what's right. Okay, so that's an interesting note about Jesus. The interesting about the centurion, though, that the centurion is going to be smart enough to realize that, right? So if he is sharp enough to be respected by the Jewish community, that means he understands the Jewish community, right? That doesn't happen by accident. Okay, you think of um, the captains in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marine Corps that have established really good relationships um, during our time in Iraq and Afghanistan with some of the local leaders. Those guys have taken the time to um, to study the culture, to figure out what the faux pas are to avoid, and to make those people feel respected, right? So this centurion has done that sort of thing, and he probably has a pretty good understanding of how Jewish culture works. And I think it's really interesting that he not only does not go to the leader to Jesus himself, he sends the Jewish leaders to go do it, right? And then when Jesus is coming to his house, he sends a servant. So he tries to keep Gentiles out of this. He tries to keep his people out of this, which is kind of interesting. When they're coming to his house, now he realizes, this isn't going to be a good situation for Jesus. So he sends a servant then to go tell him, no, 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 like, don't need to come in. We don't want to. Do not trouble yourself. I don't want to cause any problems for you. That's what he's saying, right? I'm not worthy to have you come into my house. He understands that that from a Jewish perspective, I don't want you to come to my house. He's like, therefore, I did not presume to come to you. Just say the word, and he'll be healed, right? So I would argue that what we have here is both a statement of faith and a statement of care. He doesn't want Jesus to have to deal with having the death mark from the Sicarii and additional problems with the Pharisees. Okay. And I think those two together is why Jesus says, I've not found anything like this in Israel. Okay. It's also, I think, why John includes this. Now, Jesus' statement shows that this is an affirmation about a Gentile, which is certainly mind blowing, right, for them, because Jesus is saying this guy gets it more than any of you guys do, and the you guys he's talking to are the people, God's chosen people, who have been chosen to show the world how to relate to God, right? So there's a lot of elements of why this is important and why this is kind of a messed up but also a very cool story. Um, because there's different layers of why it's important, right? So yeah, so that that I would make the case that this Roman soldier not only understands Christ's power, but shows faith in a loving sense to Christ as well, to try and prevent him from having additional problems. Again, doesn't appear that Jesus cares. Jesus like, I'll close his house. Like, that's cool. But he doesn't think that's necessary. He doesn't want to cause problems for Jesus on that. All right, what do you guys think? What else would you take away from the story?
Sorry, something you said got me thinking, and so I went and looked up a particular word because you said it again, and I was like, wait a minute, what does that mean? So I looked up the word trouble as it appears in the text to see what the actual word is in Greek. It's a strong word. So
What's it mean?
the Greek word is pronounced skulo. That's the link to the word, and its root is a word meaning a skin, like a skin of an animal, a pelt. And literally the word means to skin alive or mangle, like to flay something. It's like an extreme form of annoyance, or like it like the helps on Bible Hub says extremely annoy. I was like, I don't think I would use the term annoy with the term flay. Those don't seem to really sit together, but it's a very strong term.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like it's almost kind of like, almost prophetic. Perhaps
some of the cross
perhaps
references.
True Dodge. Maybe not too extreme for them, but I mean, when we hear the phrase, don't trouble yourself, that just sounds like, just don't go out of your way. Don't, you don't have to go, to do that. It's fine. I'll live. In our day, it's kind of this very light thing. It doesn't carry any meaning, but when you apply that term to it, I'm like, oh, that's a little bit more significant.
It looks like it appears 3 other times in the New Testament too.
Yeah, I saw there was. Hang on a second. Let me, because I had it open. 4660. I'm looking at my actual concordance.
Twice are the story with I think it's Jairus, where his daughter dies.
With Jairus.
Yeah.
Really? Or
Yep.
Jairus, or however you say his name.
However you say that, yep. And then once is Matthew 9, where he looks at the crowds and feels compassion for them because they are like a sheep without a shepherd. They are troubled. Which is certainly
Huh.
like that's a fitting use for it. But yeah, that would seem to give credence to my claim that he's trying to prevent
Yeah,
more than an
very much
inconvenience for
so.
Jesus. Yeah.
Huh. I'd never heard of that term before and never heard it used in that way, but that's really, really strong language from a centurion. We always paint him in the light of being very humble and showing tremendous faith, which he did, but it actively feels like he is aware of so much more, and so he uses very forceful language to say, don't make this trouble for you, because if there's going to be trouble, it's going to be really bad. He seems to
Yeah.
understand a lot more than the text in a simple reading lets on.
Yeah, I think that's reinforced by verse 7 too, where he explains, "This is why I didn't come to you myself." Right? Like, help me help you, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I wish we knew more about this guy, right? We get this little like glimpse of it, but he's a very interesting character. So and this is something that is rare, right? It's rare enough for Jesus to call out because we don't see too many times in the New Testament where people actually try to do what's best for Jesus or look out for Jesus. It's fairly rare to see that. Usually we see it within like his core disciples or his core group of supporters. But yeah, we certainly don't see it from Gentiles. This is the only time we see it from a Gentile. And Jesus calls it out. All right. Anything else on this passage before we move on to the next passage? This is one of my favorite passages in the New Testament, by the way, the centurion story.
I was wondering what in verse 5, what the Greek word for he loves our nation.
For which word?
Because he loves our nation and has
Well,
good.
but yes, but which word specifically?
Loves.
Okay, I'm on it. I have to. My concordance is King James, so I have to look it up in that.
Well, Winged does that. Anybody else have anything else they want to add about this passage or questions? That's a good question, Nate.
What? Oh wait, there it is. No, I think I know which one it is. Just looking at the number as it appears in the concordance, I'm like, oh, I got a good idea what that one is. Hello, Agape. Number 25. Agapao.
Interesting.
Oh wait, so a Roman soldier unconditionally loved.
That's the term that is used by the Jewish elders as it's recorded in
Interesting.
Scripture.
Wow, that's interesting. I thought it was going to be one of the other four, but interesting.
You can actually kind of see it down on the page that I linked. If you scroll down on the right, there it is. For he loves our nation, Luke 7:5.
Now, two ways to look at that.
Mm.
Some people would caution to read against reading too much into that because the idea of the different words for love meaning different things um, was somewhat created by the early church and Paul. That being said, Luke is familiar with Paul's teachings, so in relaying the story, Luke could be choosing that word based upon his knowledge of the story as well. So, yeah, that,
True. Oh.
so I would say like not 100% like don't go with it as for sure being the highest form of love in this sense. However, I think it's certainly fine to lean in that direction.
Even if, let's just say that these Jewish elders use the term, but from their perspective, they could say that, even though maybe it wasn't entirely true. Like from the way that they saw it, the fact that he built the synagogue and that he really loves the Jewish nation, whether or not it was true agape love, I don't want to say it's beside the point, but whether or not he truly cared for the Jewish nation that much, the fact of the matter is that to those that saw it, that was the way they interpreted it.
Yeah, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
To think that this guy loves like their
We hate
nation.
the Romans, but this guy, he loves us.
Yeah. This is not the relationship that the Jews had with the Romans in general. Um, there's a great author, my favorite living author, I should specify, Stephen Pressfield, and
Oh,
he really,
yeah.
yeah, he wrote a book about the early church actually, this year called A Man at Arms. Wildly
Well,
violent book.
it's
Be a
called
little
what?
careful. A Man at Arms is the name of the book.
I'll look it up.
Very violent. I would caution if you're disturbed by such things easily to against reading it. However, it's a very good book. And there's a scene in there where the Romans are crucifying um, Jewish citizens to make a point about some because the Sicarii had hit a Roman convoy. So then they were doing a reprisal raid, just crucifying a bunch of Jews just to keep the population in line. And one of the characters asks the Roman centurion in the book, um, "Does this actually help keep the population in line? Like, has it reduced the violence?" And the Roman centurion goes, "No, but it breaks up the monotony of this deployment." And I think it's a really good line because it shows that Stephen Pressfield did a lot of research, understands the sort of relationship that the most Roman centurions or most Roman officers had with the Jewish population, which was one of like, we hate them and we'll just kill them to break up the monotony, honestly. Like, so that's the norm. That's the baseline. And then you have this guy, right? Who the Jewish elders are coming and saying, like, no, he loves our nation. Like this is an outlier case, right? This is something that would make everybody who is reading this gospel all the time sit up and be like, whoa, this is weird. All right. That was a good question, Nate. Any other questions on or comments on this before we move on to the next passage? Fail. Try again. I did the command wrong. I apologize, Skynet. There we go. Okay. Can I volunteer to read the next set of verses? Luke 7:11 through 17.
Oh, I'll do that.
Go for it.
All right, let me find it here. Oh, fun one. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So, pretty simple story at first reading, right? Like Jesus goes in and raises a young man from the dead. A little bit of trivia knowledge. Anybody know where Nain is?
I don't, but I'm assuming that it's in the south of Palestine.
Yeah, it's up by Galilee, a little bit kind of southwest. The it's
Interesting.
interesting. So the only reason why I called out is because I was reading along in the commentary. You know how sometimes you're like reading, looking for interesting stuff, and you're like
Mhm.
da 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 da. It's kind of skimming through. Um, because it's about 3 miles from Endor, and I'm like, the moon? No, not the
Not
moon.
that one.
Yeah, the little town. Yeah. So not Ewoks here. We don't have that sort of situation here. But yeah, I did think that was funny. Okay. Anyway, so Jesus comes up to Nain. Not a huge town. And as he's drawing near, here's this commotion, and a man had died. The only son of his mother. She was a widow. So now that's significant because the son is supposed to be taking care of her, right? Sons take care of widows. That's how it works in that society. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. So now, not only did she lose her husband at one point, but now she lost her son, and she lost her means of kind of financial survival, if you will. So, um, the Lord saw he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." They came up and touched the briar, or the piece of wood, the coffin, if you will. It's not coffin's not the right term, but the wood that they would have been carrying the man or the young man on. And he comes up and touches it and says, "I say to you, arise." And he sits up and begins to speak. And fear seized them all. Now, of course, right? Like if you're at a funeral and like you're giving a eulogy and somebody walks up to the casket and you're like, "Hey, get up," and then the dead person gets up and starts speaking, you would be a bit freaked out by that, right? Like, understandably. Um, so fear seized them all, and they'll glorify God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." Okay, so by saying God has visited his people, are they saying that Jesus is God here? No. Nope. Nope. They would have said the same thing about Elijah and Elisha. Okay, why do I bring up Elijah and Elisha?
Well, some striking similarities.
There are. There are. Such as, obviously, they would have said about them a great prophet, right? Elijah and Elisha were considered two of the greatest prophets. Why else?
Bringing people back to life is
Right.
kind of a theme.
Yeah, they both bring somebody back to life. Okay. Now, um, they each do it different ways, and it's kind of an ordeal for Elijah. Uh, Elisha does it by how? It's kind of a post mortem recovery, if you will, in more ways than one.
I always get these mixed up. Was Elijah the one where he like stayed with them for like ever?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and he has to like stretch out in the body
Yeah.
3 times and breathe life into the body. Yep. Elisha is the one where the guys are running from the Philistines that dump a body in the cave. They're like, this guy's dead. That's really sad. Let's dump him in this cave and get out of here so we don't wind up like him. And all of a sudden the guy comes out of the cave and it's like, don't leave me behind. And they're like, what the? Because they dumped him on Elisha's bones, and Elisha's bones, when he touched him, rezzed him, if you will. Now, so the details, we talk about the details are important, right? And it's kind of understood that Elisha had more of God's spirit because, like, he had twice as many miracles as Elijah. And then another little note about that was like he didn't have to spend like the resurrection he gets, like the guy who he revives doesn't take as long and isn't as difficult for him. That's a little arguable because he's dead, but whatever. Like that's we're just doing some like very gloss over like general themes from that story there. Okay. Now, knowing that's its theme, does Jesus work harder or not as hard as the other prophets to resurrect this person? Maybe that's the wrong way of wording the question. Does Jesus have to make more or less contact than Elijah and Elisha? Resist while alive. Yes. Yeah. Hashtag best medic. Yep. This is an I have to spread myself out in the body 3 times thing. What's interesting is he doesn't even touch the guy, right? This is why Luke includes the line about him just touching the briar. Because there's a lot of parallels here to the Elijah and Elisha stories. Jesus walks up, touches the briar, the wood thing that they're carrying him on.
The beer. Is it beer or buyer? I always said beer.
Sorry, it's Bayer.
Is that how you say it?
I think so.
I'm totally looking this up.
I read words, I don't speak them.
I'm on it.
Beer, Bayer. He touches the thing. Okay. he touches the casket analog that they're carrying him on, not the body. He could touch the body, and says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." Okay. So, if we are looking at the Elijah Elisha parallels, which the people at the time would have been doing because they used the same lines about him as they would about Elijah and Elisha. This is a much less energy expended miracle for Jesus than Elijah and Elisha. And there's no physical contact, which is interesting because it was kind of understood in the Jewish community that you had to make physical contact in order to heal. One of the reasons, by the way, that the um, centurion story is included as well. Hang on. Yeah, okay, it's beer. I stand corrected. I'm wrong. Don't come to me for your pronunciation advice. Um. Anyway, touches the beer. Okay, there we go. Uh, we'll fix it in post where we post the recording. Yeah, and then it says, "Fear seized them, and they glorify God, saying, 'A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited His people.'" Okay, and then word spreads throughout the whole of Judea and all surrounding country. Interesting. Okay, very, very miraculous. Obviously shows that they would have understood that God's Spirit is on Jesus, and they would have taken this as an affirmation of His teaching. Now, what's really interesting about these proclamations that they make is they make these proclamations before or after Jesus raises the guy from the dead. Not a trick question. sequentially speaking, are they
I'm
saying
giving
Jesus is a great?
I'm giving someone else a chance. That's all I'm doing.
Are they saying that Jesus? I know you know it. Are they saying that Jesus is a great prophet and God has visited their people, his people? Are they saying that before or after Jesus raises the young man from the dead? After. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Not your question. Good. So, in order for them to say that, Jesus has to raise somebody from the dead. The Roman centurion, does he understand that Jesus is a man of great power who has the power to heal before or after he heals the servant? Before. So, the centurion Jesus has to raise somebody from the dead in order to bring the Jewish audience the same level of understanding that the centurion possessed before he raised anybody from the dead. That's kind of interesting, right? So the reason why Luke, I think one of the reasons why Luke groups these two together, um, is to is to show that God is working not just in the people of the Jewish nation, but also in the lives of Gentiles, right? Because when people are when we look at the Gentile, like we're not supposed to read that and be like, "Wow, what a great guy." Although we kind of do. That's not the point of why he's included. It shows that that God is at work in softening the hearts of Gentiles, right? People that we would think who would be at the opposite end, be at war, literally physical war with God's people. This guy, though, understands more about Jesus through God's work than the Jews do, right? Jesus says that. That's not Unger as a Gentile, like reading that into the story. That's literally Jesus saying that. And in order for Jesus to get the Jewish audience he's talking to a similar level of understanding, he has to raise somebody from the dead. Okay, to get them to the level of understanding that this guy had, that this centurion had, before he even healed the servant. Okay, so it shows what Luke is doing is showing that the gospel isn't just for the Jewish people. It's not for a specific ethnic group. It is for the whole world, even people that we wouldn't think necessarily would be receptive to the gospel. So, that being said, what do we take away from this week? How can we apply this week? My son is very sad by this, by the way. I can hear him upstairs wailing and gnashing teeth. Not a sad story, buddy. There's several takeaways we could have from this. Um, but I will propose one for tonight because there's many. Um, I think that it's important to recognize that there is no people group and no person um, outside of God's ability to save and to soften their heart. I think we oftentimes, as Christians, perhaps a bit pharisaical, walk down the street and go, "That person's probably pretty far away from God. That person's probably pretty close to God. That person's never gonna. That person is my enemy, right? Like they're opposed to everything Christianity stands for." And yet, we have a story here tonight about how somebody who everybody reading this at the time would have said this guy is against everything that God stands for. He has a deeper understanding of who Jesus is than Jesus' own people do, which shows God's power to soften hearts and God's power to work in lives, and perhaps should cause us to be a little less prideful and a little bit more humble in our interactions with others, because we don't know whose heart God is working on, and who we could potentially learn from. That's my takeaway from this week. Anybody else have any?
just thinking about it, I was John talking about the idea primarily of, just the comparison between the Jews and the Gentiles. The common saying in the church is, straight out of Hebrews 11, faith is, what we is knowing something that we don't see, the substance of things hoped for. And we walk by faith, not by sight, all this stuff. But in life, our faith is often rewarded by, our faith in God is rewarded by things, or rewarded or verified, or pick a term, in walks. That's why we pray. We have prayer requests, and we see them answered. We are justified in having our faith in God because we see the actions. When we look at the Jews from the story, they start out at a point where they're mourning the death of this young man. Jesus comes, performs his action of an answer, a quote answer to prayer. I don't think anybody was praying that he would come back to life, because I don't think they had the belief that, the faith to believe that he would, or that he could. And then he comes back to life because of Jesus' actions. And then their response is, look at this prophet. Look at this man. God has visited his people through Jesus. Then you look at the Gentile, who basically starts out where the Jews ended up. If the actions, if God's working in our lives verifies and justifies our faith, it not only does that, it deepens our faith. If we can trust him with that, we can trust him with deeper things. If the Gentiles started out believing that God could heal his servant without even having to be there, just could say it and it would happen, and then it does, how much more does that deepen his belief in Jesus? The heart of the Gentile was completely ready. And I think it's a testament to how so often we let our own lack of faith keep us from a deeper walk with God. Because God wants to justify and prove that he is capable, and that he wants us to trust him with everything. We know that, but it's a mental knowledge all too often. That's something that we allow our heart to engage in, if you're anything like me. And so it just makes it all the more incredible, the story of the centurion, a man who wasn't Jewish, could have been, a oh shoot, what's the term for someone that converts faiths?
Slight?
Sorry, what?
Proselyte?
A proselyte, yes. He could have been. We don't have evidence of that, but he could have been. But even had that been the case, he still had more faith than Jesus' own people, and his faith is rewarded. And I think it's a logical conclusion that he would follow Jesus wherever he went. Maybe not physically, but he would listen to his teachings. He would, he would heed his commandments. And I think that was a heart that God could touch. Like Ongurth was saying, no one's beyond God's reach. But I think it's also a call to us, where's our faith? God is just ready and waiting to deepen our walk. Just the faith of a mustard seed. It gets bigger from there.
No, I think that's a really good takeaway. Thank you. All right, last call. Anybody else?